Welcome to the PHP project training series. This is building a page hit counter using PHP part 3. So building a PHP hit counter part 3. In part 3 of the tutorial series, we will build our advanced PHP script, which will read and record the hits received on the multiple pages of our sample website. If you remember from the previous tutorial, we built our hit counter, but all we were seeing were the hit counts that were on the actual homepage of the website as we entered into the website. We actually wanted to take that script and make it a little more advanced, where it tracked the individual pages themselves and gave me the hits on each page of the website so we could track what areas of our website were most popular. So in order to do that, we're going to follow a couple steps. Obviously, the main point of this tutorial is to build an advanced PHP file to track the hits per page of our website. And the steps we're going to follow, we're going to create a new text file using our text editor. And we're going to name that Hit Then we're going to remove the PHP code from the web pages from our previous examples so that we can set those up for the advanced script. Then we're going to create the PHP file named advancedcounter.php. Determine what pages we want to count or what pages we want to keep track of on our website. We're going to add the code to those web pages so that we can then track the individual pages of our website as well as the total traffic on the website itself. All right, so let's go ahead and create that hitcounttxt file. Go ahead and drop out of this presentation window. You'll see that I'm back in my web browser. I'm back on the root directory of our website. I also have my text editor open, Sublime Text 2. I'm going to create a new file. And that file I want to store in my scripts directory. If you remember right, we have our count.txt file right here. That's what was counting our first hit counter that we created. So now I'm going to actually save a new file. And I want to save this as a standard text document. And I want to call this hitcount.txt. And the reason I want to call it hit count, just so we can separate it from our original file. This is going to be our total hit count. So I'm going to save it in that scripts directory. When I go ahead and refresh it now, you'll notice we've got a hitcount.txt file inside that directory also. That's where we're going to store the data for this newest hit counter that we're going to be developing. So the next step in our process is we want to remove the PHP code from our web pages from our previous example so we can begin to set them up for the new counter that we're developing. So let's go ahead and get rid of this presentation. Let's load all of our, let's go ahead and close out our hitcount.txt. Let's open up all of our files from the previous examples. Now I've got my index.php, my page 1, page 2, and page 3, and I want to go ahead and pull out that PHP code, that scripting code. Let's go ahead and set up this word wrap so that everything can be seen. And we're just going to be pulling out this PHP code that we put in this file originally, preparing these files for the new code. And you'll notice I've got it out of 3, I've got the code out of 2, I've got the code out of 1, and I've got, or I will have the code out of the index file. Oops. So we've got all that code out from the original files. I'm going to go ahead and do a save all. To save those files, if I go back in there now, you'll notice that our hit count is now gone from all our pages. It's not counting as it was in the previous demonstration, so now we've prepared those pages for what we'll be doing with our advanced hit counter. So I'm going to go ahead and save all my changes, and let's move on to our next step. Okay, so now the next step we want to do is we want to create the PHP file named advancedcounter.php, which will actually be much more advanced than our original hit counter and go in and count the individual pages. So let's drop out of our presentation. Let's go ahead and close all the files that we currently have open. I want to open up a new file, and I want to go ahead and bring up our code snippets for part 3 of the tutorial series. If you've purchased the tutorial, you'll actually have this text file inside your part 3 folder. If you have not, I'll make sure that we've got this set up where we can pause it so you can copy. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and grab all of our PHP code. I'm going to do a copy. Let's go ahead and minimize our code snippets. I'm going to go ahead and paste this into my text editor. Let's set up our word wrap. Good, we're configured for word wrap. And now let's go ahead and talk through what we're doing here. This is a lot more complex than the original one that we had set up So let's talk through some of the new features and the new functions that we have inside this new PHP file. I want to do save as. I'm going to save this in our scripts directory, and we're going to call this advanced counter.php. That's adv counter.php, and let's go ahead and save that file. If I go back to our local host now, inside of our scripts directory, we should now have the advanced counter.php file, which we've just created, and our hit counttxt file, which is what we're going to use to go and read from this. So let's walk through this code and talk about what this new code's doing. All right, I expanded our window a little bit on our desktop. I actually minimized our browser window, so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing here because there's a lot more code on this file than was in the previous. So I've expanded our desktop, our text editor desktop a little bit so you can see it. This, by the way, would be a great time to pause your video and type this first portion down and get down to this F close. If you can get down to there, will be good. So I'm going to go ahead and stop, let you pause for a minute, and catch up if you don't have a copy of the sample files. Okay, so let's talk about what we had. First thing we're doing is we're creating a file variable at the top of the screen. And just like in the previous example, we're going into our scripts folder and we're reading or we're grabbing that hitcount.txt file. So we've got the full path of that text file. We're actually grabbing that text file and putting it into a variable called file. Now I'm using the fopen function just as we did in the previous example, and I'm reading that file with our R attribute and assigning that entire file to a name variable. I'm also setting up a new buffer variable with an empty string. So I'm declaring the variable so we have it because we're going to need it further down in our code. And we need to declare it first. So we're declaring the variable with nothing in it so that we can add to it. You'll see as we get further into code. Then I'm setting up a found variable and I'm setting its value equal to false. And again, that's going to be for our if statement. You'll see that when we get down into our code. And I'm setting my hits variable equal to 1. So everything when we first go into it is going to have a value of 1 as the first time through, which would make sense if you think about it, because the first time we view a page, that would be 1. We wouldn't want it to say 0. So we're setting the value up as the first time. The first time through, it's going to be 1. So now let's look at what we do when we read our data. I'm putting together a while loop, and while not file end of file. FEOF is a built-in function in PHP, and we'll go through these new functions just like we did in the previous tutorial. You'll see a slide in a minute which will describe these a little closer, but this is file end of file. So I'm looking to see if I'm not at the end of the file for my hitcount.txt, then I'm going to walk through this while loop. So I'm setting my buffer equal to trim. I'm trimming the file, just like we did in the previous example, and I'm putting it in a buffer variable. If the string length in the buffer variable is greater than 0, in other words, if there's values in that string length for that line, I want to list the page and the count. And in order to do that, I'm exploding it using a pipe symbol as the difference from the buffer. And you're going to see in a minute when we talk about the explode function and the list function. That allows me to go into an array, grab the values out, and based on the pipe symbol in this example, we could use different symbols. I'm actually using the pipe symbol. That's going to separate the values in the array itself. So if it's not found and the page is equal to server PHP self, then I'm going to set the hits. I'm going to equal the count plus 1, so I'm going to add 1 to the value of the hits, reassign it to that value. I'm going to set up a new buffer, and I'm appending this new buffer. Dot equal is a concatenation equal, so I'm taking the value that's already there and appending this to it. And this server underscore or $_ server is a global variable in PHP, and it's getting the PHP self. In other words, what is the value of that page? And what that is, that's actually the page name that we've given it, like page 1, page 2, page 3, index, and it's going to take the value of the page and assign it to it. Then it's also going to say that page has this many hits based on the value of that variable. Then it's going to continue walking through that while loop, and if found while true. So if found is true, we're going to keep walking through till it's false. When we get to the else, new buffer is going to be dot equal. In other words, we're adding to the buffer, and then I'm adding a line feed to it. So we go to the next line and walk through it again until we run out, until there's nothing left in that file. We're going to keep walking through this and building onto that new buffer until there's nothing left in the file. And then I'm going to close, just like we've done in the previous example, we're going to close that name variable. So the file that we had open, we're walking through all this, we're exploding all those things out, we're separating the page from the value of hits, printing them out on our screen, going through again till we run out of lines, then we close the file when it's done. Then, let's go ahead. This would be an excellent time to pause and get the rest of this, because now we're going to get this last if statement. If not found, in other words, if this value is not found, if we haven't found a value, we set up a new buffer, again, server, the name of the page, plus the lines value, in other words, new line feed, and then we write to that file. We're going to append that file, writing back the new hits. Name, open the file, in write, fwrite the name of the file with a new buffer for the hits, and then close the name of the file, and then we're going to echo the hits back to our screen. And very, very similar to what we've done before. So the new variables, or the new functions, I should say, not variables, the new functions that we're going to discuss. If you want to learn how the while loop works, go ahead and watch the Essential Training Series, While Loops in PHP. But we are going to talk about string length, file into file, and explode. So let's look at string length, file into file, and explode in PHP, so you can get an idea of how they work as compared to how the other functions work in the previous example. Okay, let's talk for a few minutes about some of the new functions that we saw in this tutorial. We actually looked at 3 new functions that we hadn't used in the previous PHP file that we created, and the first one of those being string length. And string length returns the length of a given string. The string name is stored in the parentheses. So if you remember back to our demonstration, I'm looking at string length of what's in our buffer and making certain it's greater than 0. We didn't need this in the previous example because our string length was one value. I mean, we had a value of a number. That's all we had. Now we actually have the names of pages and numbers, as you're going to see when we look at that text file. So we need to know what the value of the string length is and making certain that the buffer is greater than 0 so that we still have values that we're looking at inside that variable, that buffer variable. The next thing that we talked about, and this is an interesting one, it's file end of file. Test for the end of a file on a file pointer. Are we at the end of the file that we read yet? And again, like the previous example, since we only had one value inside that previous example, we were always at the end of the file. I mean, that was the last value in there. But because now we've got multiple pages, and as we add those pages, this file can become bigger and bigger. We have to have some way of checking to see, are we at the last line in that file? Because if we are at the last line, we're going to do things differently than we would if we were in the middle of the file and wanting to print those values out. So that file into file is checking to see, are we at the last line of that file? The next thing, we actually used an explode function that is built into PHP, and that splits a string by string and returns an array of strings, each of which is a substring of the string formed by splitting it on the boundaries formed by the string delimiter. I know it sounds very complex. It really isn't that hard to understand. What we're doing is, since we're now printing out the page name and the value of the hits, how many hits are on that particular page, it's printing that out in a long string. We've got to have some way of splitting that string into 2 separate values, the value of the page name and the value of the hits. So what we're doing is, for delimiter, we're assigning this pipe symbol. So I've got the value of the page name, which is right here, server PHP self, that's telling me the value of the name. I'm using a concatenation symbol, and then I've got this pipe symbol in between them, and you're going to see that when we look at our text file. And now I've got the hits. So I'm looking at the hits, the name, and then I'm sending a new line feed to send a new line so we can go to the next line of our text file. So what I'm doing is I'm telling it to take that value, take the page and the count, explode it, separating it with the pipe symbol so that I know what the values are. Which one's the page name? Which one is the value of the hit counter itself? So those are the 3 new functions that we looked at in this tutorial: string length, strlen, file into file, and explode. just in this short PHP project that we've done, we've used quite a few built-in functions of PHP. So let's move on to the next section of the tutorial. All right, so coming back to our steps, we've created a new text file using our text editor, and we've named that Hitcounttxt. We've gone into the web pages we created in the previous tutorial, and we have removed that PHP code from the web pages from our previous examples. That's what the code that was actually giving us our original homepage count. We've created a new PHP file and named that advcounter.php, which is our advanced counter. We've talked about the code that made up that counter. And now we're going to go in and determine what pages we want to count, and we're going to add code to each web page so that we can utilize that new advanced counter.php file to track individual web pages for our counts. All right, so let me minimize our presentation. Get back, you'll notice we've got our split screens back now. I've got my web browser on the left-hand side of our screen with our 4 pages. We've got our text editor on the right-hand side. I'm actually looking at the index.php file. One thing I do want to point out, I noticed as I was going through and working with this code, I'd actually made a mistake in the original code. I want to make certain that you guys are aware of it so you can get it corrected on yours. Let me go extend this screen a little bit so you get a better view of what we're doing. When we're setting up that server variable that actually goes in and pulls that page number, that page ID or the name of the page itself, because that's a string, we need to include that in single quotation marks inside of our square brackets, or else it's going to generate an error. So if you look at your ADV counter code, I've actually put single quotation marks around each PHP underscore self in all 3 locations where we actually have that called. On line 14, on line 16, and on line 28. So if you go in and please correct your code to reflect that change, or else it's going to generate an error for you when we actually run this code. I had forgotten that we actually have our page names and I have some spaces in them. Since I have spaces in them, I've got to treat them like a string, or else it's not going to come back correctly without generating an error. So if you'll just go ahead and include those in single quotes or double quotes, either one, you will be fine. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I want to identify what pages, let's go back into our localhost, what pages I want to have track our count. So the first thing we're going to do, let's bring up our index.php page, because obviously that's our home page. We want to track that page. I'm going to open up my text file, my example code snippets, and at the very top of the snippets file, we're going to see another include, just like we had done in our previous exercise, that we can actually put into our pages. So right below that second paragraph page, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. Control C on the Macintosh, Control C on PC to copy, Command C to copy on the Mac, and Control V to paste and Command V to paste on the Mac. So now I've pasted that into my index.php file. I'm going to go ahead and pause this. This would be a good time to pause if you need to type it in if you don't have a copy of the example files. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this file. So now we should be tracking our index.php page. So since I've got the file saved, if I were to bring this page up, you'll see that our index.php page has 1 hit. And if we look at the hit count, I've actually loaded inside my text editor, I've gone into that scripts file and loaded our hitcount.txt file so that you can actually see not only now are we copying the number of hits, but we're actually, because of the fact that we're using this page equals server PHP self, I'm actually getting the page name with the hits. So I can see that my index page currently has 1 hit. If I go back and I refresh this page, the hits are going to go up just like they had done before. So now when I go back and reload my hit count, you'll notice now we're up to 5 hits on that page. Now let's go do the same thing. Let's go ahead and load page 1 of my website. So I'm going to open up page 1. Let's go ahead and drag this down here. And I'm going to put that same code that we used inside of our index file. Control C to copy. Command C on the Mac, and in page 1, right under the second paragraph, Control V to paste. Command V to paste on the Mac. I'm going to go ahead and set up my word wrap so we can see the full thing. Now I've put that same line inside page 1. I'm going to go ahead and save this. If I go back to my website, go back to my home page, I've got 6 hits. Page 1 now has 1 hit. And if we look at that hitcount.txt file, you'll notice now we've got the hit count for page 1 is currently 1. and index is 6. And again, because we set up our advanced counter.php file to actually grab the page name, as we're writing this thing back in, or as we're writing back to our file, we're actually writing back the page name plus the pipe symbol and the number of hits. So that when I explode this out, as we talked about earlier, I'm separating it using that pipe symbol. So now I know I've got a page name and a path, as well as the number of hits to that particular page. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with our other pages. Let's open up our file. I'm going to go ahead and open up page 2 and 3 also. And I'm going to put that code in line or page. So I'm going to go ahead and close out my advanced counter PHP. Let's close out page 1. We close out the index page. On page 2, let's go ahead and paste that same bit of code that we have just put on the index file. Let's save it for page 2. Go ahead and close out page 2. And I'm going to do the same thing on page 3. So now we're actually tracking all of our pages. It's word wrap so you can see it. Again, it's the same line of code we had in the previous examples. You can pause it if you want to type it in, but you should be able to copy and paste this from your index file if you typed it in the index file itself. It's the same line of code. Nothing is changing on this include statement. The only thing that we've actually changed is we've changed our text file, obviously, and we've changed our advanced counter PHP file. Let's do a save all. And now if I go back to my home page, I can go to page 3. Let's go ramp page 3 up a little bit by doing some refreshes, get these guys far apart. Page 2 has 1 hit, page 3 has 8, page 1 has 2, and home has 8. And keep in mind, we put, let's one more time real quick. Let me go back and open this advanced counter so as not to see 0 on the first time in. That's why we actually set this hit 1 the first time it goes through, so that when we go through the very first time, it doesn't come up as a 0. If we didn't have that set to 1, we'd actually start with 0 the first time in. But because we had it set to 1, we're starting at 1, and now every time we go to these pages, they're individually incremented by 1. If I go and look at my advanced counter, or not the advanced counter, but the Hit Counttxt, you'll now see that we actually have a line of code or a line of text for each individual page. What I kind of like about this, let me show you something that's kind of neat because of the way we did this. I'm going to close out the advanced counter PHP. I'm going to close out the text file. I want to save page 3 as page 4. So if I were to add a line of code to my website, or not a line of code, I'm sorry, but if I were to add a new page to my website. So I've added now a 4th page to this website. Go back to my hit counter, and you see now we've got 4 pages in our website itself. The only thing I didn't add is I probably should have added a link. So let's go on in here, Control C. And I'd want to add a page 4 link to every one of my pages. We're just going to have the page 4 link though from 4 and 3. Actually, no, let's just add it to all of them, so that you can see how we would really do this. So let's open up all our pages. Let's go to index. I'm going to copy this list, this bullet that we just put into our unordered list. Let's go to index and put that in. Control V. Save our index file and close it out. Let's go to page 1 and put it in. Command C to copy. Command V to paste on the Mac. Control C and Control V on the PC. Got that one in. Let's go put it into page 2. Is already there. Let's save page 2. Save. Oops, forgot to make that page 4. Save. I'm going to put this on page 3. Save. And I'm going to change that to page 4. Okay, so now we've added the link, but what's really cool is now we've got all these things saved. If I go back into my index file and I go to page 4, you'll notice it comes up with hits. So just because we have this thing, the way that we wrote the file, it just added that to our hit count file. Now it shows page 4. It just added it just like everything else. So I could add more and more pages just because of the way we've actually written the code. It's very dynamic. It adds those pages to our Hit Counttxt file. So it's kind of cool. I mean, it works well. It tracks all our individual pages. Kind of neat. So I hope you enjoy it. Now, let's talk about where we're going to go next. So we've added some pretty cool functionality to our hit counter. Now, let's go back to our presentation for a minute. In part 4 of the tutorial, let's add some administrative functions to the web page so we can rapidly view the traffic on our website by the page. Right now, we're actually calling up that text file to look at the text file and see what our traffic is per our individual pages. That's not the way you would do it on a dynamic website. You'd actually have an admin section of the website where you can actually call up a page that was only accessible to you and view the traffic on your individual pages or videos or news files, whatever you had on that website. You can actually have counters on individual items. And in fact, if you notice on the OnTarget HTML5 website, we actually have counters on each video so you can actually see how often videos are being viewed. So in the next part, or part 4 and the final part of this tutorial series, we're actually going to build a small admin section, and we're even going to format it a little bit with CSC so you can see how I set up some of the administrative functions of my site. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.